Okay, so let's begin with Richard Spencer at University of Florida. So Richard Spencer is a garbage human, and Richard Spencer is the leader of this white supremacist movement. He says he's not a white supremacist because everyone should have their own ethnocentric country, but whites created civilization. It's a dumb argument. Whites did not create civilization. Westerners created civilization, and Western culture created civilization. Not every white created Western civilization, and not people from other cultures or other ethnicities. They are capable of assimilating into that civilization. That's just the fact of the matter. As I've said before, people who were considered barbarians at one time are now considered stalwarts in the white supremacist notion, right? The Irish, the Germans, the Italians, right? These are now considered stalwarts in the white supremacist pantheon. Well, white supremacists back in 1890 thought all of these groups were gross, and they thought Jews were gross too, and a lot of them still do. So no. So Richard Spencer was speaking at University of Florida. Now, let me give a hint to people on the left. If you really think that Richard Spencer is the most dangerous man alive, if you really think that he's egregious, go outside, protest outside his speech, and then leave the crowd completely empty. Nothing would be as damaging to Richard Spencer as going to University of Florida and him being in an auditorium by himself twiddling his thumbs. Right? Here instead is some tape of what actually happened at University of Florida, and Spencer's going to use this to say that he was basically silenced and shut down, and he's a victim in the free speech wars. Okay, so there's Richard Spencer doing his routine. I spoke at University of Florida. I don't think it was in the same auditorium. I spoke in University of Florida a few months ago, and it went great. It was easy. There were a couple protesters outside, nothing like this. Why? Because I'm not Richard Spencer, clearly. But also, I want you to look at that auditorium. Can you run it back a little bit? There's a part where it sort of screens through the audience, and you can see that there's a gap of seats, and then there's like 2 rows of white guys in white shirts. So you'll see it in just a second. It was really close to the top. So what you're going to see here is there the gap, right? Gap of empty seats, lots of empty seats. And then you'll see that right in front, there's a group of white guys who are standing and clapping, right? A group of white guys in button-up white shirts who are standing and clapping. And when you see this, what you'll notice is that these are the only Richard Spencer fans in the entire place, right there. That's it, right? It's like 12 guys, maybe 20 guys there, right? It's like a 500-person theater minimum. And there are like 20 guys there. Imagine if the protesters had been smart enough to just stay outside. And this entire thing happened, and there were like 15 guys there. How humiliating that would be for Richard Spencer. Richard Spencer operates off your ire. Richard Spencer operates off your anger. I don't feel that that's what I'm here to do, by the way. When I speak on campuses, I say things I think are true. The fact that they piss people off is always kind of a shock to me. But the fact is that you're giving Spencer what he wants. Don't be stupid. Don't give him what he wants. Go protest outside. Leave the auditorium absolutely empty. Demonstrate that, like, he has 7 fans, which is the reality. Okay, other things that I hate. We'll do one more thing that I hate. Al Sharpton, I don't even know why in the world you would consider Al Sharpton any sort of source for anything. He is now going out there saying that President Trump is the polarizer in chief. This is a guy who, as I've said before, was involved in helping incite riots in Crown Heights in 1991 that ended with the murder of Yankel Rosenbaum, an Orthodox Jew. He was involved in inciting violence at Freddy's Fashion Mart. There, a guy who was a fan of his set a fire and it killed 8 people. He is routinely race-baited. He lied about Tawana Brawley openly. He's a piece of absolute filth, Al Sharpton. I mean, he's just a garbage person. And yet he's being trotted out as somebody to talk about the nature of Trump's polarization.
But he is not just Donald Trump in New York polarizing people. He's the president of the United States. And for the president to imply that police should defy the rights of citizens under arrest, for the president to throw out police reforms that the Justice Department investigated and found necessary, it warrants us to come out and speak loudly and clearly that he has become the polarizer in chief in this country.
Yeah, he's so polarizing. He's so polarizing. He may be polarizing, but Al Sharpton is not the guy you want to trot out to talk about that. Okay, Time for a few mailbag questions. If you are a subscriber, now is the time to send in your live mailbag questions as well. So congratulations to you. Kevin says, hey, Ben, I was wondering why you think the LGBT community, especially the gay community, has increased over the years. I've been wondering this for a while now. Thanks. I'm a big fan. Have a good day. So I have not seen, so if you mean sympathy, then I think that's largely because of media attention. If you want to say the number of people who are actually gay or bisexual or trans has increased, there is evidence to this effect. The reason is because I do think that sexual behavior is malleable. I think sexual desire is somewhat malleable. I don't think it's entirely malleable. I think it has a genetic component and an environmental component. I think when you say to people that whatever floats your boat is what floats your boat, people are more apt to try things. Right? Just as when you say that single motherhood is no longer to be morally abhorred, you get more single motherhood. When you say that homosexuality or bisexuality is on an equal moral plane with heterosexuality, you're likely to get more of that sexual activity. People experiment with sex. People are tempted by the forbidden. And so you get more people identifying with these things. And you see these numbers going up dramatically in places like Britain, guys saying that they're now willing to experiment with other guys, et cetera. So I think a lot of it has to do with media attention and changing social mores. I don't think that that's necessarily a good thing. I think that people should make decisions in their sex life based on what is best for their happiness. And I think that promiscuity is generally not best for your happiness. I think that heterosexual marriage is generally the best for people's happiness, but not for everyone, obviously. Crystal says, I love you. Crystal, I don't know who you are, but my wife, I'm sure, would not mind if I say I love you too, not knowing who you are and hoping that you're not a horrible person. Ben says, hey, Ben, I know quite a few liberals who have stopped being Christians because of the overwhelming support of Trump by evangelical Christians. What does this say about today's society and the future of religion in the country? Will the government be our deity in 100 years? Thanks. Well, first of all, if they were liberals and they were Christians, then they have some inherent contradictions in the first place, because Christianity does not tend toward liberalism on either the economic spectrum or on the social spectrum, for certain. On the religious freedom spectrum, leftism and Christianity are pretty much incompatible as well. If you are, this is one of my key complaints about people who don't understand religion. If what turns you off to religion is the adherence of religion, then you're not really turned off by religion, you're turned off by people. People suck. Okay, people sin. The entire basis of Christianity is that people are born into original sin. Judaism doesn't believe that people are born into original sin, but it does believe that we have a Yetzer Hara, right, an evil desire, an evil inclination, and a Yetzer HaTov, and a good inclination, and they're constantly fighting it out. If you believe that there are people who you disagree with on politics who did the wrong thing because of their Christian viewpoint, and so you leave Christianity, maybe it's because you weren't a very good Christian to begin with. Maybe you should instead try and convince them, as so many Christians I know who didn't vote for Trump do, that they were wrong to support Trump. And if they support Trump and they're Christian, maybe they have good reason to do so. Okay, Dylan says, what do you think of the efforts in the medical community to change medical eponyms named after alleged Nazis? Seems similar to the Confederate statue issue. So I don't know enough about which exact medical eponyms would be attributable to Nazis. I am not in favor of wiping away things that are accomplished. I don't like wiping away the history of things and whitewashing the history of things. I'm generally not a big fan of that. So as I've said about Confederate statues, I agree with Condi Rice that they should remain up, and we should, every time we walk past a Confederate statue, we should remind people that the Confederates were on the wrong side of this argument and why. And I feel the same way about a lot of the medical advances that were taken under the Nazis. I think it's important to recognize that so that we ourselves recognize the balance between mistreatment of human beings and medical research, because we're too apt to think that either history is clean or that we can have it all today, that there's no conflict between, say, human rights and science. There very clearly is when it comes to things like fetal stem cells, right? This is a serious issue. Okay, Maurice says, what do you think about cultural appropriation? If someone that is not Jewish wears a yarmulke as a fashion statement, is that offensive to you as a Jewish person? Well, first of all, if everyone started wearing a yarmulke, it would make me a lot happier, and then I wouldn't stand out quite as much. I think that'd be hilarious. But as far as them wearing yarmulkes as a fashion statement, it'd be a weird fashion statement, and I don't really see religious icons per se being used. I think you can diminish the value of a religious icon. I'm not sure you can diminish the value of a cultural icon. I do think there's a difference between the two. So if you were to wear a yarmulke around, I would say, well, that has holy meaning to me, and you're sort of defacing the holy meaning. If you say, as a lot of people say, well, hoop earrings are somehow a cultural appropriation, no, they're just a nice thing that you wear and people like how it looks. They don't really have any holy meaning. If they did, that's sort of a different story. Aaron says, what are your thoughts on The Great Gatsby? Well written, overrated. those are my thoughts on The Great Gatsby. F. Scott Fitzgerald is a beautiful writer. His word choice is phenomenal, and he writes about some of the most boring people who ever lived. His characters, I'm just not a huge Fitzgerald fan. I just read a Fitzgerald book recently. I'm trying to remember which one it was. It was Tender as the Night. I just read Tender as the Night maybe 4 months ago, and it is not a good book. I know people praise that. There's this whole era of literature that people really praise to the skies. The only one from that era of literature who I really can stand is Hemingway. I am not a huge F. Scott Fitzgerald fan, even though I think his writing is quite beautiful. Braden says, should elected representatives vote for what their constituents want when it conflicts with their faith? So this is a big debate between sort of Burkean philosophy and I'd say Montesquieu philosophy, maybe. Burkean philosophy is you elect me to exercise my own independent judgment. This is what the founders thought, too. They thought that the purpose of a republic rather than a democracy is that it's not my job to enforce what you want me to do as my constituent. It is my job to do what you elected me to do, which is exercise my own independent judgment. This is why the character of the people we elect matters. This is why we don't just vote directly on issues. So, no, I don't think it's wrong for you to buck your constituents if you think they're wrong. You just may feel at the ballot box next time. Jeff says, Ben, I know many young people that say they are conservative and talk as if they are, but they do not act like they are. In some cases, they have no work ethic or very little. My concern is one day they will grow up and have to actually work and they won't know how to. So my question is, do you see this with young people? And if you do, what should be done? I'm not saying it's every young person, but I've noticed the shift or disappearance of work ethic since I was younger. I'm only 36. So yes, Jeff, I tend to agree that there are a lot of people across the board who claim they're conservative or have conservative values and they don't work and they blame circumstance. The key conservative, when people ask me why I grew up conservative, it wasn't that my parents grew up talking about George Bush Sr. And Bill Clinton to me when I was a kid. It's that they had one fundamental value. Work hard and there will be consequences. Don't work hard and there will be consequences. Actions have consequences. If you believe that, then at root you're a conservative. If you don't believe that, at root you're not. Mark says, God Emperor Shapiro, I'm relatively new to the Bible. What books would you recommend I read first? Well, honestly, I would recommend that you start by just reading the Bible. I mean, I think that you can actually it was meant to be read. And it was meant to be understood. So I think that you should just read the Bible itself first. And then there are specific books by C.S. Lewis that I think are quite good from a Christian perspective on the Bible. There are some books from the Jewish perspective. I think Dennis Prager actually has some good books on sort of Jewish philosophy. It depends. Elie Wiesel has a couple of books that are eminently readable and really terrific. There's one called Messengers of God that's really good about the figures in Genesis that is really fascinating. And to be honest with you, I have been writing over the past year and a half a compendium of thoughts on the Bible, and I think that we'll probably bring it out sometime next year. So if you can wait for that, then you can have some of my thoughts. You know, I do the Bible thoughts every Wednesday. You can have that in more fleshed out form, at least for the Old Testament, the 5 books of Moses. You can get that probably